The scream came from my own son's mouth, but it sounded like a monster. "Today you're the next to die, mother." David's eyes were wild and angry as he pointed his finger at me like a gun. His face was red with rage, and spit flew from his mouth as he shouted words that cut my heart like broken glass. "I am Rosa Martinez, and I'm telling you this story from my small house in San Antonio, Texas. What I'm about to share will make you gasp, make you cry, and maybe even make you hug your own family a little tighter tonight. If this story touches your heart, please like this video, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe because stories like this need to be told." My husband Carlos had been dead for 3 months. 3 months of trying to hold our broken family together with my bare hands. 3 months of watching my brilliant son disappear into a dark place I couldn't reach. But nothing prepared me for the moment my own child looked me in the eyes and promised I would be next. Let me take you back to when life was beautiful, when I believed fairy tales were real and families stayed happy forever. I grew up in a tiny house on Flores Street where the smell of my mama's fresh tortillas mixed with the sound of my papa's hammer. Mama, Isabella, could sew anything: wedding dresses, baby clothes, Halloween costumes that made all the neighborhood kids jealous. Her fingers moved like magic across the fabric, creating beauty from simple cloth. Papa, Roberto, built furniture that lasted forever. Tables, chairs, bed frames. Everything he touched with his rough, gentle hands became something special. Our house was small, but it was filled with so much love that it felt like a palace. "Mija," Papa would say, lifting me onto his shoulders. "Remember this, a family that loves each other can survive anything." I believed him with my whole heart, but there was something Papa didn't talk about much. Something that made Mama cross herself and whisper prayers when she thought I wasn't listening. Great-grandfather Eduardo. Eduardo had been Papa's grandfather, a man with brilliant ideas and hands that could build anything. But Eduardo also had a darkness inside his mind that grew stronger as he got older. He would talk to people who weren't there. He would scream at shadows on the wall. He would forget his own children's names and call them strangers. One terrible night, when Papa was just a little boy, Eduardo took a kitchen knife and chased his own wife around their house, believing she was an enemy trying to hurt him. "The sickness runs in our blood," Mama would whisper to her sisters during Sunday dinner. "It skips some people, but it's always there, waiting." I was young and didn't understand what they meant. The adults would change the subject when I walked into the room, but I felt the fear in their voices like cold wind on my skin. As I grew up, I pushed those scary stories to the back of my mind. I was going to have a different life, a happy life filled with love and laughter and children who would never know sadness. I was 17 when I met Carlos Rivera at the church dance. He was 22, with kind brown eyes and a smile that made my stomach feel like it was full of butterflies. Carlos worked as an accountant at a small business downtown, helping people with their taxes and money problems. "You have the prettiest smile in all of San Antonio," he told me as we danced to a slow song under the twinkling lights. Carlos was gentle and patient and good. He brought me flowers every Friday, yellow roses because he said they matched the sunshine in my laugh. He held doors open for me and stood up when I entered a room. He called my parents sir and ma'am and asked Papa's permission before taking me anywhere. "This boy will take care of you," Papa said after Carlos asked for my hand in marriage. "I can see it in his eyes. He loves you the way I love your mama." We had a small wedding in 1977 at St. Mary's Church, with Mama's homemade dress and Papa's wooden altar that he built just for our special day. Carlos promised to love me through good times and bad times, in sickness and in health, until death do us part. We moved into a tiny apartment near downtown with 1 bedroom, a kitchen the size of a closet, and big dreams for our future. Carlos would come home from work with numbers in his head and stories about his clients. I found a job at the department store, helping ladies find the perfect dresses for their special occasions. Every night, we would sit on our old couch and plan our future. Carlos wanted to start his own accounting business called Rivera Financial Services. I wanted babies, lots of them, filling our home with toys and laughter, and the sound of little feet running through the halls. First we save money, Carlos would say, taking my hand in his warm, soft fingers. Then we buy a house. Then we fill it with children who will call me Papa and you Mama. Life was perfect and simple and beautiful. And then, on March 15th, 1978, our son David came into the world. The moment I held him, I knew he was special. His eyes were bright and curious, like he was already trying to figure out all the secrets of the universe. He was born with a full head of black hair and fingers that gripped mine like he would never let go. "Look at those eyes," Carlos whispered, tears running down his cheeks. "This boy is going to change the world." We had no idea how right Carlos was. But we also had no idea about the darkness that was already hiding in David's beautiful, brilliant mind. The same darkness that had destroyed great-grandfather Eduardo. The same darkness that would one day make my precious son look me in the eyes and promise that today I would be next to Odai. David was not like other babies. While other children his age were just learning to say Mama and Dada, our David was speaking in complete sentences. At 18 months, he could count to 100. At 2 years old, he was reading books meant for children twice his age. "Mama," he said one morning, looking up from a picture book about dinosaurs, "did you know that Tyrannosaurus rex lived 68 million years ago, but Stegosaurus lived 150 million years ago?" They never even met each other. Carlos and I looked at each other with amazement. Our 3-year-old son knew more about dinosaurs than most adults. "He's gifted," Carlos said, his chest puffed out with pride. "Our boy is going to be a scientist or a doctor, or maybe even a professor." By the time David was 5, he had read every book in the children's section of our local library. The librarian, Mrs. Garcia, would save new books just for him because he would finish them in one day. "I've never seen anything like it," she told me, shaking her head in wonder. "This child's brain works differently than other children. He's special, Rosa. Very special." Carlos's accounting business was growing, and in 1985, when David was 7, we bought our dream house on Maple Street. It had 3 bedrooms, 2 bathrooms, a big backyard with an oak tree perfect for climbing, and most importantly, a room that would become David's library. We painted it sky blue and filled it with bookshelves that reached from floor to ceiling. Carlos hung a sign on the door that said, "David's Thinking Room," in bright red letters. "This is where our son will do his homework and read his books," Carlos said, putting his arm around my shoulders. "And maybe someday he'll help me run Rivera Financial Services." Father and son, together. The early years were like living in a beautiful dream. Carlos would come home from work, and David would run to the door shouting, "Papa, Papa, I learned something new today." Then David would tell us about black holes in space, or how butterflies change from caterpillars, or why the sky is blue. Carlos would listen with his eyes wide, asking questions and making David feel like the smartest person in the world. "Tell me more, Mijo," Carlos would say, sitting cross-legged on the floor while David drew pictures to explain his ideas. "How do you know all these amazing things?" But even in those happy times, there were small signs that something was different. David didn't play with other children. At birthday parties, while other kids ran around playing tag or hide-and-seek, David would sit in a corner reading a book or talking to himself about planets and stars. "He's just shy," I told myself when other mothers asked why David didn't want to play with their children. Smart kids are sometimes different. At school, David's teachers called him brilliant but strange. He would finish his math homework in 5 minutes, then spend the rest of the time drawing complicated pictures of machines that didn't exist or writing stories about traveling to other planets. "David is extremely intelligent," his 3rd-grade teacher, Miss Rodriguez, told us during a parent conference. "But he seems to live in his own world. He talks to himself during recess, and sometimes I catch him having full conversations with nobody." Carlos squeezed my hand under the table. "All creative kids have imaginary friends," he said quickly. "It's normal for smart children." But late at night, when Carlos was asleep, I would lie awake remembering Mama's whispered stories about great-grandfather Eduardo, the brilliant man who built beautiful furniture but also talked to people who weren't there. "It's nothing," I would tell myself, pushing the scary thoughts away. David is just special. He's going to be fine. By the time David turned 10, his strangeness was getting harder to ignore. He would spend hours staring at the patterns in our wallpaper, claiming he could see secret messages hidden in the design. He would refuse to eat certain foods because he said they were trying to change his thoughts. One evening, I found him in his room at midnight, wide awake and arranging his books in a specific pattern on the floor. "David, what are you doing? You should be sleeping." He looked up at me with eyes that seemed much older than 10 years. "The books told me they needed to be in this order, Mama. If I don't arrange them correctly, something bad will happen to Papa." My heart started beating fast. Books don't talk, Mijo. They're just books. David's face became very serious. "They don't talk to you, Mama. But they talk to me. They tell me secrets about the world that other people can't hear." I sat on his bed and pulled him close to me, feeling his small body tremble against mine. "David, sometimes our imagination can seem very real. But books are made of paper and ink. They can't actually talk." He pulled away from me, his eyes filling with tears. "Why don't you believe me? Why does nobody ever believe me?" That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about Eduardo, about the darkness that ran in our family blood, about the way David's eyes looked when he talked about his secret world. "Carlos," I whispered, shaking my husband's shoulder. "I'm scared about David." Carlos rolled over and pulled me close. "He's just a creative kid with a big imagination, mi amor. Don't worry so much." But I was worried. The fear was growing in my chest like a cold, dark flower. When David turned 15, the strange behaviors got worse. He would stay awake for days, claiming he was protecting our family from invisible enemies. He would check every door and window in our house multiple times each night, making sure they were locked against dangers only he could see. "They're watching us," he would whisper, peeking through the curtains at our quiet street. "They're planning something. But don't worry, Mama. I won't let them hurt you." Carlos and I took him to our family doctor, Dr. Martinez. "It's probably just teenage stress," Dr. Martinez said after examining David. "Smart kids sometimes have anxiety problems. He'll grow out of it." But David didn't grow out of it. By 17, he was talking to himself constantly, having long conversations with voices only he could hear. He would laugh at jokes nobody else understood, or suddenly become angry about things that weren't happening. "The professors at the university are jealous of my ideas," he told us one evening at dinner. "They're trying to steal my thoughts by putting special chemicals in our water." Carlos and I looked at each other across the table, both of us thinking the same terrifying thought. This wasn't just teenage stress. This wasn't just creativity or imagination. This was the same darkness that had destroyed great-grandfather Eduardo. The sickness that Mama had whispered about was growing inside our beautiful, brilliant son's mind. And we had no idea how to stop it. One night in November 1995, I woke up to find David standing at the foot of our bed, staring at Carlos and me with eyes that looked empty and cold. "You're not my real parents," he said in a voice I didn't recognize. "You're strangers wearing their faces. Where are my real Mama and Papa?" My blood turned to ice. The darkness had finally come for our family, and it was just the beginning of our nightmare. The night David stopped recognizing us was the night our world ended. "You are not my parents," he screamed, backing against the wall of our bedroom like a trapped animal. "My real Mama and Papa would never try to trick me like this." Carlos slowly got out of bed, his hands raised like he was approaching a dangerous animal. "David, Mijo, it's me. It's Papa. Look at me carefully." But David's eyes were wild and terrified. He was looking at his father, the man who had taught him to ride a bike, who had read him bedtime stories every night for 17 years, and seeing a complete stranger. "You're wearing his face," David sobbed, pressing himself harder against the wall. "But you're not him. Where is my real Papa? What did you do to him?" I had never been so scared in my entire life. The next morning, we rushed David to the emergency room at Methodist Hospital. Dr. Sarah Chun, A young psychiatrist with kind eyes, spent 3 hours talking to our son while Carlos and I waited in the hallway, holding hands and praying to every saint we could remember. Your son is experiencing what we call psychosis, Dr. Chen explained when she finally came to talk to us. His brain is creating a false reality that feels completely real to him. He truly believes you are strangers pretending to be his parents. The word, she said next, hit me like a punch to the stomach. Schizophrenia. Carlos made a sound like he was choking. No, he whispered. Not our David. He's just confused. He's been studying too hard for his college applications. He's tired. Dr. Chen's voice was gentle but firm. Mr. Rivera, your son is experiencing delusions and hallucinations. This is a serious mental illness that affects about 1% of the population. The good news is that with proper treatment and medication, many people with schizophrenia can live meaningful lives. But I couldn't hear anything after that word. Schizophrenia. The darkness that had haunted our family for generations had finally caught our precious boy. David spent 2 weeks in the psychiatric ward. When we visited him, he would look through us like we were ghosts. Sometimes he would talk to empty chairs, having serious conversations with people only he could see. The doctors are part of it, he whispered to me during one visit, looking around nervously. They're working with you to keep me here. But I know the truth. I know who you really are. When David finally came home, he was like a different person. The medications made him sleepy and slow. The boy who once read 5 books a week now stared at the ceiling for hours, his brilliant mind trapped behind a fog of chemicals and confusion. But the worst part was that he still didn't believe we were his real parents. I'm only staying here because I have nowhere else to go, he told us coldly. But I'll never stop looking for my real family. Carlos tried everything to connect with his son. He would sit beside David's bed and tell stories about when David was little, the time they built a treehouse together, the camping trips, the night David lost his first tooth. Remember when you were 8 and you wanted to be an astronaut? Carlos would say, his voice breaking. You made me promise to help you build a rocket in the backyard. But David would just stare at the wall. That wasn't me, he would say. That was some other boy. I don't know why you're telling me lies about a stranger's life. Months passed. David's condition got worse. He would go days without sleeping, convinced that enemies were trying to break into our house. He would barricade his bedroom door with furniture and refuse to come out to eat. One evening in March 1996, Carlos came home from work looking exhausted. His accounting business was struggling because he was spending so much time taking David to doctor appointments and dealing with insurance companies. Rosa, he said, sitting heavily at our kitchen table. I'm scared we're losing him forever. I sat beside my husband and took his rough hands in mine. Carlos had lost weight, and his hair was turning gray. The stress of watching our son disappear was killing him slowly. We'll never give up on David, I said firmly. Never. He's our son, no matter what this sickness makes him believe. But that night, something terrible happened. I woke up at 2 a.m. to the sound of crashing and screaming from David's room. Carlos and I ran down the hall to find our son throwing his books and furniture around his room like a tornado. There in the walls, David was shouting, pulling books off his shelves and hurling them across the room. Can't you hear them? They're trying to get inside my head. Carlos tried to grab David's arms to stop him from destroying everything. David, please. There's nobody in the walls. You're having an episode. But David spun around with rage in his eyes. For a moment, I saw something in his face that made my blood freeze. It was the same look great-grandfather Eduardo must have had the night he chased his wife with a kitchen knife. Get away from me, David screamed, pushing Carlos so hard that he fell backwards into the hallway. That's when we knew we had to take David back to the hospital. Dr. Chen explained that David needed stronger medications and more intensive treatment. This time, he would have to stay in the hospital for at least a month, maybe longer. I know this is heartbreaking, she told us as we signed the papers. But David is a danger to himself and possibly to others when he's having severe psychotic episodes. We need to stabilize him before he can come home again. Carlos drove me home that night in complete silence. Our house felt empty and cold without David's voice, even though that voice had been saying cruel and scary things for months. 2 weeks later, Carlos got a phone call at work that changed our lives forever. His coworker, Miguel, was being threatened by 3 drunk men outside a bar downtown. Miguel called Carlos because he was scared and didn't know what else to do. "I have to help him," Carlos told me over the phone. "Miguel has 2 little kids. I can't let anything happen to him." "Carlos, I know." I begged. "Call the police. Don't go there yourself." But Carlos had always been the kind of man who helped people in trouble. "I'll be careful, mi amor. I promise. I'll be home in an hour." That was the last time I ever heard my husband's voice. The police officer who came to my door at midnight had sad eyes and a heavy voice. "Mrs. Rivera, I'm sorry to inform you that your husband was killed tonight while trying to help a friend. He was stabbed during a fight outside Murphy's bar on Commerce Street." The floor seemed to disappear beneath my feet. Carlos, my gentle, kind Carlos who wouldn't hurt a fly, was dead. Murdered by strangers while trying to do the right thing. I had to drive to the hospital to tell David that his father was gone forever. When I walked into his room, David looked at me with those empty, suspicious eyes. "Where's the man who pretends to be my father?" he asked coldly. "Why isn't he with you?" "David," I said, my voice shaking with grief. "Carlos, your papa, he's dead. He was killed trying to help someone." For just a moment, David's face changed. I saw a flicker of the little boy who used to run to the door shouting, "Papa, Papa," when Carlos came home from work. But then the darkness closed over his eyes again. "I don't know who you're talking about," David said, turning away from me. "That man was not my father. My real father is still out there somewhere, looking for me." I collapsed in the hospital chair and cried until no more tears would come. My husband was dead. My son was lost in his own mind. And I was alone with a grief so deep it felt like drowning. 3 months later, David came home from the hospital, and that's when he looked me in the eyes and made the promise that nearly destroyed what was left of my heart. "Today you're the next to die, Mother." But I wasn't his mother anymore. I was just another stranger in a world that made no sense to his broken, brilliant mind. After David threatened to kill me, I did something that surprised even myself. I didn't run away. I didn't call the police. I didn't give up on my son. Instead, I looked into his angry, confused eyes and said the words that would change both our lives. "David, I don't care if you think I'm a stranger. I don't care if you hate me. I don't care if you want to hurt me. I will never stop fighting for you. Never." For just a second, something flickered in David's face. Confusion. Maybe even a tiny bit of the love that used to be there. But then the darkness took over again, and he turned away from me. That night, I sat at my kitchen table with a cup of cold coffee and made a list. Not a grocery list or a to-do list, but a battle plan for saving my son's life. Rose's plan to save David. Find the best doctors in Texas. Learn everything about schizophrenia. Fight the insurance company for better treatment. Keep David safe, no matter what. Never give up, even when it's impossible. The next morning, I started making phone calls. "Hello, this is Rosa Rivera. My son has schizophrenia and he needs help." I called hospitals in San Antonio, Austin, Houston, and Dallas. I called doctors, social workers, and support groups. I spent hours on the phone, getting transferred from one person to another, hearing the words, "I'm sorry, we can't help," over and over again. But I didn't give up. Finally, a kind nurse at Houston Medical Center told me about Dr. James Wilson, a psychiatrist who specialized in treating young people with severe mental illness. "Dr. Wilson has helped a lot of families like yours," she said. "But there's a 6-month waiting list, and the treatment is expensive." "I don't care about the money," I said quickly. "And I'll wait as long as it takes." While we waited for the appointment, living with David became like walking through a minefield. I never knew when he might explode with anger or fear. Some days, he would sit quietly in his room, staring out the window at nothing. Other days, he would pace through the house for hours, muttering to voices only he could hear. "They're planning something big," he would whisper, checking the locks on our doors for the 20th time. But don't worry, I'm watching them. I won't let them hurt you. The strangest part was that even though David thought I was a fake mother, he still tried to protect me from his imaginary enemies. The love was still there, buried deep under all the sickness and confusion. One night, I woke up to find David standing guard outside my bedroom door with a baseball bat. The voices said they're coming tonight, he told me seriously. But I won't let them get to you. You may not be my real mama, but you're kind to me. I don't want you to get hurt. My heart broke and filled with hope at the same time. 3 months later, we finally got to see Dr. Wilson in Houston. He was a tall, gentle man with gray hair and eyes that had seen a lot of pain but still held kindness. Dr. Wilson spent 4 hours talking to David while I waited in the lobby, reading the same magazine page over and over because I couldn't concentrate on anything. Mrs. Rivera, Dr. Wilson said when he finally came to talk to me, your son is very sick, but he's also very strong. With the right treatment plan, I believe we can help him. What kind of treatment? I asked, holding my breath. David needs to move to Houston for at least 6 months for intensive therapy. We have a residential program where he can live in a safe environment while we work on finding the right combination of medications. It won't be easy, and it won't be cheap, but it's his best chance. I thought about our savings account, the money Carlos and I had put aside for David's college education. Money that was supposed to pay for his dreams, not his sickness. How much? I asked. When Dr. Wilson told me the cost, I felt dizzy. It was more than we had saved in 20 years of marriage. I'll find a way, I said firmly. Whatever it takes. That night, I called my sister Elena and explained everything. Rosa, you can't spend all your money on this, Elena said gently. What if the treatment doesn't work? What will you live on? Elena, he's my son, I said, starting to cry. If I don't try everything, I'll never forgive myself. Carlos would want me to fight for David. Elena was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, okay, I have some money saved. And I know Mama and Papa would want to help too. We're family. We'll figure it out together. Moving David to Houston was one of the hardest things I'd ever done. He fought me every step of the way. You're trying to get rid of me, he screamed as we packed his clothes. You're working with them to put me somewhere I can't escape. David, I'm trying to help you get better, I said, folding his shirts with shaking hands. I'm not sick, he yelled, throwing his books across the room. Everyone else is crazy, not me. But somehow, we made it to Houston. The treatment center looked like a small college campus, with brick buildings and green grass and patients walking around looking almost normal. Dr. Wilson introduced us to the nurses and therapists who would be taking care of David. We'll call you every week with updates, Dr. Wilson promised me. And you can visit once a month. Driving home to San Antonio without David was the loneliest feeling in the world. Our house felt like a tomb, full of memories and silence. For the first month, the phone calls from Houston were terrible. David had another violent episode, the nurse would report. He threw a chair through a window because he thought the FBI was watching him through the glass. David refuses to take his medication. He says we're trying to poison his brain. David hasn't slept in 3 days. He's convinced that sleeping will let the aliens steal his thoughts. I would hang up the phone and cry until my eyes were swollen and red. But slowly, so slowly, things started to change. David participated in art therapy today, Dr. Wilson told me during our 4th-month phone call. He painted a picture of a tree. It was the first time he's shown interest in anything creative since he arrived. David had a good day yesterday, came another report. He ate breakfast with the other patients and didn't mention any voices or conspiracies. When I finally got to visit David after 3 months, I almost didn't recognize him. He had gained weight, and his eyes looked clearer. He was sitting at a table in the rec room, working on a painting of a sunset. Hello, he said when he saw me. His voice was quiet but not angry. Hello, David, I said carefully, not wanting to upset him. I've been thinking, he said slowly, not looking up from his painting. Maybe you're not trying to hurt me. Maybe you're just confused about who you are, like I'm confused about who I am. It wasn't much, but it was the first time in over a year that David had spoken to me without hatred in his voice. "I think you might be right," I said softly. That's when David looked up from his painting, and I saw something beautiful. For just a moment, I saw my real son looking back at me. "This painting," he said, pointing to the canvas, "it's for someone important to me. Someone I think I used to know. Someone who used to make me feel safe." My heart started beating faster. "Who is it for, David?" David's eyes filled with tears. I think it might be for my mama. My real mama. But I can't remember her face anymore." I wanted to scream, "I'm here. I'm your real mama," but instead, I just smiled and said, "She must have loved you very much." "Yeah," David whispered. "I think she did." As I drove home that day, I realized something amazing. David was finding his way back to me, one tiny step at a time. And for the first time since Carlos died, I felt something I thought I had lost forever. Hope. 6 months later, David came home from Houston carrying a suitcase and 3 beautiful paintings. He still didn't call me Mama. He still thought I might be a stranger. But when he walked through our front door, he looked around and said something that made my heart sing. "This place feels familiar. Like maybe I belonged here once." Dr. Wilson had warned me that David's recovery would be like climbing a mountain. Some days we would go up, some days we would slide back down. But the most important thing was that we were moving in the right direction. "David has found something that helps him connect with reality," Dr. Wilson explained during our last meeting in Houston. "Art. When he's painting, his mind becomes quiet and focused. The voices get softer. The fear goes away." David had painted dozens of pictures during his time in treatment. Landscapes, portraits, abstract swirls of color that seemed to show the chaos inside his mind. But there was one painting that took my breath away. It was a picture of a woman with dark hair and kind eyes, holding a little boy with a big smile. The woman's face was blurry, like David couldn't quite remember what she looked like. But her love for the child was painted so clearly that it made me cry. "Who is this?" I asked David as we hung his paintings in his old bedroom. David stared at the painting for a long moment. "I don't know," he said quietly. "But whenever I look at her, I feel safe. Like she would never let anything bad happen to the little boy." I knew that woman was me. And that little boy was the David I remembered, curious, brilliant, and full of joy. Somehow, deep in his confused mind, David still carried the memory of being loved. Over the next year, David's condition slowly got better. He took his medication every day without fighting. He started sleeping through the night instead of staying awake to fight invisible enemies. Most importantly, he spent hours every day painting. Our garage became his art studio. David would wake up every morning, eat breakfast quietly, and then disappear into the garage with his brushes and paints. Sometimes I would peek through the window and see him working with the same intense focus he used to have when reading books about dinosaurs. "The paintings help me think clearly," David told me one evening as we ate dinner together. "When I'm creating something beautiful, the scary thoughts can't find me." I started taking David's paintings to local art fairs and community centers, hoping someone might want to buy them. Not because we needed money, but because I wanted people to see David as an artist, not just a sick person. At first, people would look at the paintings and ask, "Who made these?" "They're incredible." When I told them my son painted them, they would smile and nod politely. But when I mentioned that David had schizophrenia, their faces would change. Suddenly, they weren't interested in the art anymore. They were uncomfortable and would walk away quickly. "People are scared of mental illness," I complained to my sister Elena one day. "They can't see past David's diagnosis to the amazing person he really is." But Elena had an idea that changed everything. "What if you don't tell people about the schizophrenia right away?" she suggested. "What if you just let them fall in love with the art first?" The next weekend, I took David's paintings to the monthly art market downtown. I set up a small table with a sign that said, "Original Paintings by David Rivera, Local Artist." A woman named Patricia Santos stopped at our table and spent 20 minutes looking at David's paintings. She was the owner of a small art gallery called Expressions. These paintings have so much emotion, Patricia said, holding up David's sunset painting, the one he had made for his real mama. There's pain here, but also hope. Who is this artist? I'd like to meet him. My heart started racing. He's my son. He's very talented. Would he be interested in showing his work at my gallery? I think people would really connect with these pieces. I almost fainted with excitement. Really? You want to display David's paintings in a real gallery? Absolutely. Art this powerful needs to be seen. When I told David about the gallery opportunity, he was quiet for a long time. Do you think people will like my paintings? He asked nervously. David, your art is beautiful. It shows people that even when life is hard and confusing, we can still create something wonderful. David's first art show opened on a Saturday evening in October. I was so nervous I couldn't eat all day. What if nobody came? What if people didn't understand David's art? What if someone was mean to my son? But when we arrived at the gallery, there were already 20 people looking at David's paintings. Oh my goodness, Patricia whispered to me. People are really responding to his work. Look. David stood in the corner, wearing his best shirt and looking terrified. But as people stopped to admire his paintings, I watched his face change. Pride. Joy. The same expression he used to have when Carlos praised him for learning something new. An elderly man with a kind face approached David and said, "Young man, this painting of the storm clouds, it speaks to my soul. How did you capture so much feeling in the brushstrokes?" David looked surprised that someone was talking to him like a real artist. Well, he said slowly, sometimes I paint what it feels like inside my mind when I'm scared or confused. The storm clouds represent the noise in my head. That's incredible, the man said. Art should make people feel something, and your work definitely does that. By the end of the evening, David had sold 5 paintings. 5 people loved his art enough to take it home and hang it on their walls. As we drove home that night, David was quiet for a long time. Finally, he said, "Rosa?" It was the first time in 3 years that he had called me by my name instead of that woman or the stranger. Yes, David. I think maybe you really are my mother. The feelings I have when I'm with you, they're the same feelings I get when I look at that painting of the woman and the little boy. Tears rolled down my cheeks, but I kept driving. What makes you think that? Because a stranger wouldn't fight so hard to help me get better. A stranger wouldn't love my paintings or believe in me when everyone else thinks I'm crazy. Only a real mother would do all the things you've done for me. I pulled the car over to the side of the road and turned to look at my son, my real son, who is finally finding his way back to me. David, I have loved you every single day since you were born. Even when you couldn't remember me, even when you were scared of me, even when you thought I was your enemy. Nothing will ever change that. David reached over and hugged me for the first time in 4 years. I'm sorry, Mama, he whispered. I'm sorry I forgot who you were. I'm sorry I said I wanted to hurt you. The sickness made me think terrible things, but underneath it all, I always loved you too. 2 years later, David has had 3 more art shows. His paintings now hang in homes and offices all over San Antonio. He takes his medication faithfully, sees Dr. Wilson once a month, and has learned to recognize when the dark thoughts are trying to take over his mind. Is David completely cured? No. Schizophrenia doesn't go away like a cold or a broken bone. There are still bad days when the voices get loud, or when he becomes suspicious and scared. But David has learned to use his art as a weapon against the darkness. When his mind starts to feel chaotic, he picks up a paintbrush. When the world seems frightening and confusing, he creates something beautiful. And I've learned something too. I've learned that love doesn't cure mental illness, but it gives people a reason to keep fighting. I've learned that hope can grow in the darkest places, like flowers blooming in winter. Most importantly, I've learned that my son, my brilliant, creative, amazing son, is so much more than his diagnosis. He's an artist. He's a survivor. He's living proof that broken things can be made beautiful again. David still lives with me, and that's okay. Some nights, I hear him talking quietly to himself in his room, but now I know he's not talking to scary voices. He's talking to his paintings, planning what he'll create tomorrow. Mama, David said to me yesterday morning over breakfast, do you think Papa would be proud of my art? I looked at my son, this brave young man who has fought his way back from the edge of madness, and smiled. David, your Papa would be so proud of the man you've become. Not just because of your beautiful paintings, but because you never gave up. You kept fighting, even when fighting was the hardest thing in the world. David smiled back at me, that same bright smile I remembered from when he was little, and told me about dinosaurs. I kept fighting because I had something worth fighting for, he said. I had you. So to everyone who is listening to my story, remember this. Mental illness can steal many things. It can steal memories, peace of mind, and easy happiness. But it cannot steal love. It cannot steal hope. And it cannot steal the human spirit's ability to create something beautiful, even in the darkest times. If you're fighting this battle with someone you love, don't give up. Keep believing. Keep hoping. Keep fighting. Because sometimes love really is enough to light the way home. If this story touched your heart, please like this video and share it with someone who needs to hear it. Tell me in the comments where you're watching from, and remember, you're never alone in your struggles. The sun always rises, even after the darkest night. If this story moved you, if it made you cry, if it gave you hope, I need you to do 3 things right now. Smash that like button. Let me know this story touched your heart. Share this video. Someone in your life needs to hear Rosa and David's story. Maybe it's a friend struggling with mental illness, a parent fighting for their child, or someone who has lost hope. Your share could save a life. Tell me in the comments. Where are you watching from? Have you or someone you love fought this battle? What gave you strength during your darkest moments?